Hello everyone, and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The tension had been simmering for months, but nothing prepared viewers, nor the Brown family, for the explosive showdown that would erupt the moment Kody Brown's ego took center stage and swallowed up the fragile peace the Sister Wives clan had been desperately trying to maintain, because as the cameras rolled and the pressure of season 19 weighed down on every unresolved wound, every buried resentment, and every broken promise, Kody suddenly stormed into frame during a family discussion meant to ease tensions only to escalate them, launching into a fiery rant that instantly sent shockwaves through the room, with Robin staring in disbelief, Mary's eyes narrowing, Christine shaking her head with a mix of exhaustion and defiance, and Janelle standing up straighter as if preparing for a battle she knew was coming, and as Kody pounded the table, his voice rising with a furious mixture of self-righteousness and denial, he insisted the family was falling apart because no one had been listening to him, completely ignoring the years of emotional neglect, favoritism, broken trust, and the long trail of tears he had left behind each of his wives except one, and as he gestured wildly, declaring himself the only one keeping this family together, the wives exchanged glances that showed just how deeply his words cut, because for them, this wasn't just another fight or another dramatic moment for television. It was the culmination of years of emotional fatigue, sacrifice, and the growing realization that Kody's vision of family had become warped by ego, pride, and his refusal to see the very damage he had caused, and Janelle was the first to react, her face tightening with frustration as she told him that leadership wasn't about control or forcing obedience, but about compassion and consistency, something he had failed to show. Yet instead of listening, Kody doubled down, accusing her of never supporting him, a claim that left her stunned because she had spent decades being the steady, reliable wife who always held the family infrastructure together while he chased affection, attention, and validation elsewhere. And then Christine, emboldened by her newfound independence and the clarity she had gained since leaving the marriage, cut in with sharp honesty, reminding him that she walked away because his love had conditions, his promises were empty, and his expectations were built around what made him feel powerful rather than what made their partnership healthy. And Kody, feeling cornered, snapped that Christine had poisoned the family, sparking immediate outrage from the wives present, especially Mary, who for once stood firmly against him instead of shrinking back into silence, telling him he had no right to rewrite history or paint himself as the victim when everyone, including the children, knew how his selective affection and dismissive behavior had been the real poison tearing them apart. And as Kody's face reddened and he tried to interrupt, Mary kept going, saying she was done being the quiet, convenient target for his frustrations, done being the wife who took the blame for his choices, and done pretending he valued her when he had spent years showing the opposite. And for the first time in a long while, the room fell silent except for the sound of Kody's heavy breathing as he tried to regain control of the narrative. But the wives had reached a breaking point, one that couldn't be smoothed over with empty declarations or his usual dramatic claims that he alone carried the burden of the family, because the truth was now out in the open, raw, ugly, and impossible to ignore. And when Robin finally spoke up, hoping to play mediator, her voice cracked as she begged them to stop fighting. But even she couldn't deny that Kody's blow-up was rooted in months of him feeling threatened by the wives gaining independence, confidence, and emotional clarity without him. And as he paced around the room, muttering about betrayal, lack of loyalty, and how the family had stopped respecting him, Janelle suddenly stood, grabbed her bag, and calmly announced she wasn't going to stand there and be lectured like a child, and she walked out of the meeting, leaving the cameras scrambling to follow her, and her exit triggered something powerful. Christine followed, stating she refused to be part of another toxic argument where Kody twisted their words. And even Mary, whose loyalty had once been unshakable, rose from her seat with trembling hands, whispering that she was done defending someone who never defended her, and one by one, the wives walked out, leaving Kody alone in the room with Robin, who looked both horrified and heartbroken as she tried to coax him into calming down, but he instead launched into another tirade about ungrateful wives and how he had sacrificed everything for them, failing to realize that his version of sacrifice had always been measured by his convenience rather than their emotional needs. And as the producers debated whether to cut the cameras, the scene continued unfolding with brutal honesty, capturing Kody pacing in circles, trying to figure out how he had lost control so completely, and then realizing, though too late, that his wives no longer feared his anger, no longer felt obligated to absorb his emotional storms, and no longer believed the narrative he had crafted for so long, that he was the misunderstood patriarch whose authority was never respected, when in reality it had been his unchecked ego, favoritism, and refusal to self-reflect that had slowly pushed his wives to the edge. And as the minutes passed and the house grew quieter without the voices of the women who once built their lives around him, Kody finally sat down, running his hands through his hair, muttering that he didn't understand how things got this bad, but the audience watching at home knew, the wives knew, and the world knew that this meltdown wasn't sudden. It was the inevitable collapse of a man who demanded loyalty without giving love, who demanded obedience without earning trust, and who demanded a united family without taking responsibility for being the one who fractured it. And the moment the wives walked out, each of them in control of their own emotions, their own narratives, and their own futures, became the defining moment of the season, the moment fans would replay, discuss, and analyze for months, because it wasn't just drama for entertainment, it was the painful unraveling of a family whose cracks had been visible for years but had finally erupted on camera for all to see. And as the episode closed with Kody staring blankly at the door his wives had walked through, the message was undeniable. This time, they weren't storming out just to cool off. They were walking toward new lives where his ego could no longer dominate the storyline, and instead of seeing their departures as betrayal, the world saw them as liberation, as a reclaiming of power from a patriarch who no longer held the authority he believed was his birthright. And with the wives gone and the future of the Brown family hanging in uncertainty, viewers were left with one question: would Kody finally confront the damage his ego caused, or would he spiral even further as the women who once held his world together began building new ones without him? But the real shock came hours after the wives walked out, because once the crew shut down the cameras for the night and the dust began to settle, word spread across the family group chat that Kody was still spiraling, sending long, frantic voice messages blaming everyone but himself, accusing the wives of sabotaging the show, sabotaging his reputation, and sabotaging the family legacy. He claimed he had been protecting all these years, and those messages, dripping with desperation and fury, were met not with panic or guilt like in years past, but with a cold, unified silence that showed just how far the women had emotionally detached from him. And while Robin tried to comfort him, pacing the living room and begging him to stop sending self-destructive messages, he refused to hear her, insisting that the wives had ganged up on him out of jealousy and bitterness, completely blind to the idea that their reaction was not a sudden rebellion, but the culmination of years of quiet suffering that had simply reached its boiling point on camera. And as Kody spiraled deeper into his self-made narrative of betrayal, the wives, now in separate homes but connected through private messages, began finally admitting things they had been afraid to say out loud for years. Like Janelle confessing to Christine that she had emotionally checked out long before their 2022 separation but stayed because she kept hoping Kody would wake up and realize the harm he was causing, and Christine revealing that she no longer felt even an ounce of guilt for leaving him because the meltdown proved exactly why she needed to reclaim her peace, and Mary typing a long, unexpected message saying she no longer recognized the man she married decades ago, that the version of Kody standing in front of them today was consumed by ego, resentment, and a fixation on control that had replaced the charismatic husband she once trusted. And her message hit the others like a lightning bolt because for years she had been the quiet one, the one who stayed loyal even when it made her look foolish, the one who kept giving him the benefit of the doubt, and now, even she was finally breaking the emotional chains that had kept her tied to a marriage that no longer existed in any real form. And the wives encouraged each other, a rare moment of unity that viewers had been waiting for. Because instead of fighting among themselves like Kody always insisted they did, they now saw the truth. That the division wasn't between the wives but between them and the man who claimed to lead them while doing nothing to earn their trust. And as the wives processed the meltdown, production held an emergency meeting to assess the future of the show, debating how to handle the footage. With some crew members arguing that the scene was crucial to the storyline and others worrying that Kody's behavior could spark backlash that might jeopardize the network's relationship with the family, but the consensus soon became clear. The explosion was not only real but necessary, a raw crack in the patriarchal facade that had defined the Brown family narrative for over a decade, and the network knew viewers would be glued to their screens when it aired. Not out of morbid curiosity, but because it finally showed the truth millions had suspected, that Kody's household wasn't collapsing because polygamy was too difficult, but because Kody himself was no longer capable of holding it together without demanding control, obedience, and unquestioned loyalty. And while Kody continued venting to Robin about how everyone was turning on him, Robin slowly realized that even she could no longer defend his behavior, her voice softening as she told him that maybe the wives weren't betraying him at all. Maybe they were simply exhausted, hurt, and done being blamed for problems he refused to acknowledge. But instead of listening, Kody lashed out again, insisting that Robin didn't understand what it felt like to have his entire family walk out on him, ignoring the irony that he had emotionally walked out on them years before they physically left him that night. And as Robin cried, torn between defending him and fearing he was unraveling beyond recovery, Kody locked himself in his office, pacing under the dim light and rehearsing the speech he planned to deliver on camera the next day. A speech he hoped would regain control of the narrative, paint him as the misunderstood patriarch, and guilt the wives into returning to the conversation, unaware that the wives had made a collective decision not to return until he took accountability, something he had no intention of doing. And the next morning, when production arrived to restart filming, the tension was suffocating, with Kody sitting stiffly in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched, waiting for the wives to appear. But when only Robin walked in, the air shifted, his eyes narrowing in disbelief as Robin explained gently that the wives were not coming, that they had requested a separate meeting with producers to discuss boundaries, emotional safety, and the future of the show. And Kody erupted again, slamming his fist on the table and accusing the wives of forming a mutiny, of trying to cancel him from his own family's reality show. But production intervened, telling him calmly that the wives had the right to express their concerns and that filming would proceed with or without his participation. And this instantly shattered the illusion of control he had been clinging to, because for the first time in the show's history, his authority was openly challenged both by his wives and by the production team, and that realization sent him spiraling once more, pacing the floor and muttering about betrayal and disrespect while Robin sat quietly beside him, tears streaming down her face as she whispered that she didn't want to lose the other wives, that she didn't want the family divided forever. But Kody, blinded by pride, insisted that if the wives couldn't respect him, then maybe the family didn't deserve him, a statement that left even the production crew stunned because it revealed exactly how far his ego had grown, to the point where he now saw himself as the center of the family rather than one part of it. And as the day went on and the wives met separately, they discussed, sometimes tearfully, sometimes with newfound strength, what they wanted moving forward: more transparency, more respect, more independence, and most importantly, a family dynamic that wasn't built around one man's mood swings and ego. And as they talked, something shifted among them, an emotional solidarity that had long been missing, as if by walking out together they had finally reclaimed their voices, their choices, and their futures. And whether or not the family ever came back together in the way Kody once envisioned no longer seemed to matter, because the wives were no longer characters in his story. They were women writing their own. And when the episode eventually airs, viewers will watch a moment that marks the end of an era, the collapse of a patriarch's power, and the rise of wives who finally chose themselves.